Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I am your host, Eric Smith, and today I'm talking about Joyful Recollections of Trauma by Paul Scheer. And this is from, there it is, Harper One. This is a little memoir. And before I get into it, a little background. Paul Scheer, comedian, actor, podcast host. I first became aware of him on the TV show The League, which is an absolutely hilarious show about a group of guys that have a fantasy football league. I'm not into fantasy football, but you don't have to be, because that's a part of it. That's what keeps this group of people together for the most part, but it's absolutely hilarious show. Paul Scheer is in it. And then, I started seeing him here and there. He's co-host of my favorite podcast, How Did This Get Made? He's in movies and he's done improv, all sorts of stuff. And on How Did This Get Made, he would occasionally tell these little anecdotes about his childhood. Just weird, funny stuff. There's one about Melissa Joan Hart, I believe it was dating someone at his school, and she came to visit one day. He had a math test where he'd gotten an F, so it had to be signed by his parents, and he asked Melissa Joan Hart to sign his math test, and so she signed it as if she were his parents, and he showed that to the teacher. Or one of the craziest ones is how he tried to French kiss his own mother, because as a child he thought that's how people who that's how you showed affection to the people you loved. Not, that it was a sexy love thing, but if you loved someone like a kid loves their mother, you French kiss them. Yes, weird stuff. But of course, everybody, you gotta write a book about this stuff. And so he decided to write a book, but it's not all that funny stuff. We're gonna get into that, but a little more introductory nonsense. I pre-ordered this book very, very early because, Paul Scheer kept talking about it on his podcasts and things, and said if you pre-order the first 3,000, I think, would get a postcard, a personally signed postcard from Paul Scheer, and you would get access on his website to sort of archives, different things like the Melissa Joan Hart signed test, just different stuff from his life that only the people who pre-ordered would get access to this on his website. So I was like, what the hell? I'm going to buy the book anyway. Let's pre-order it. And so I got this postcard, and I almost tore it up and threw it away, because I had been at my nephew and niece-in-law's place for the weekend and playing games all weekend, board games. And I got home. It was late on Sunday, and I saw my mail, and it looked like just a generic piece of junk mail. Just a quick view right there. So it's like, oh, it's just one of those generic things, one of those ads that you get. I'm going to tear it up and throw it away, as I do, but fortunately I looked a little closer. So there's the front of the postcard, just a weird picture of Paul Scheer, and then on the back it's got my name, and it's number 256 of 3,000, and it says, thank you for being one of the first people to buy my book. Your support and friendship means the world to me. And then there's a little Mad Libs kind of thing here. And I don't know what he wrote, how many different things he wrote for different people. All I know is what he wrote for mine seems perfect, considering who I am. And it just says, I will never forget the time we, and then written in, outran zombies. Your buddy Paul Scheer, thank you for ordering my book. There's what that looks like. Anyway, that's all just a bunch of nonsense about this book that I'm going to talk about. Joyful Recollections of Trauma. As I said, it's This is not like a book of comedic essays. This is a memoir that goes back to his childhood up to adulthood and marriage and fatherhood and things. And that's basically your nutshell. For the too long didn't watch crowd, I gave it 4 out of 5, despite what I thought was going to be, again, just this sort of collection of amusing anecdotes. And there is some funny stuff in here, but it's the title. This might be the most important word in the title, the trauma part. I really liked it. So 4 out of 5 stars. It's written very personably. It's written as if he's just sitting there, or maybe sitting with you, or doing an interview, just telling these stories. Um, excuse me. And but it does. There is some serious trauma in here. He goes into the abuse that he suffered at the hands of his stepfather. He talks about, and he has talked about on his podcasts, that his parents were divorced. He'd spend weekends with his dad. He lived with his mom during the week. We know all about that. But he, at least in the podcasts that I've heard, he hasn't talked about his stepfather and how abusive he was. And so, not just mentally abusive, he goes into a thing where his stepfather would tell him, if he didn't pick his coat up off the floor, he'd go to jail where he would be raped constantly. But also physically abusive, choking him over a game of Monopoly in one case. And so his mother would try to leave, would come back because she didn't have the means to get away. Eventually, spoilers, eventually she does. But so yes, some serious trauma in this book. But he talks about that in his childhood, and some misadventures in his childhood, some scary things that happened in his childhood. He was into movies and things from a very young age, and so there's a few stories about celebrity encounters when he was a kid, um, and and then growing up, his time with the Upright Citizens Brigade, I believe it was, not the Groundlings, and meeting Amy Poehler, who was in the UCB above him, and auditioning for Saturday Night Live. And then eventually there's plenty of stuff related to his meeting his future wife, current wife, June Diane Raphael, another co-host of How Did This Get Made? The third co-host is Jason Mantzoukas, a man that I love. But so covers the whole gamut of his life, and again, some very funny stuff. Some of his celebrity encounters are pretty funny, but again, some very traumatic stuff. And he does talk about how how it affected him growing up, and how it affects him as a parent now. He and June Diane Raphael have 2 children, and he talks about certain other aspects. I don't want to give all the details away, but certain aspects of who he is, and how he has never meant to talk about this publicly, but thinks maybe if he talks about it, it'll help other people talk about it. So it's breezily written, and if you're a fan of Paul Scheer, if you've ever heard him talk on one of his podcasts, How Did This Get Made? Also has one called Unspooled with Amy Nicholson. That's all about movies. It started out as a podcast where they were just going to talk about all the movies on the AFI Top 100 list, and then once they'd covered all of those, they've moved on to just talking about other things in movies and things in movies, interviewing people, different things. But if you've ever heard him talk in a podcast or an interview or anything else, uh, that style comes through in in his writing. I wouldn't. I assume he's got plenty of other stories to tell, so I wouldn't be unhappy if he wrote another book sharing some more stuff. But 4 out of 5 for this. Unexpected, not the laugh out loud. Uh, there were a few laugh out loud moments, but not the as I said, the sort of just funny essays that a lot of back in the day. If you watch my reading remembrances videos, I've covered a lot of books by comedians that I've read. Dennis Miller, Bill Cosby, Paul Reiser, different comedians, George Carlin, and it's books of their comedy, essentially. And that's not what this is. This isn't just a book of comedy. It really is a memoir that digs deep into the traumatic experiences that he has had, and it moves on from there as he's grown up. But really an interesting book, and I do think that if you were to read this and identify with certain aspects of what he's talking about, it might be, sort of helpful that game recognizes game. That would that be the proper term to use? Um, anyway, 4 out of 5 stars. Paul Scheer, Joyful Recollections of Trauma. I really enjoyed this book. It's not going to be for everyone. I figure a lot of people that watch my channel are looking for horror novels and things, so this might not be my regular viewer's cup of tea, but I don't want to judge anybody. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe all of you secretly want to read about actor, comedian, podcaster Paul Scheer and his childhood trauma. There you go. That is the book. The question, I think, might be rather obvious. Are you familiar with Paul Scheer? Did you ever watch The League? Do you listen to either of his podcasts? Have you seen him in movies? He's in, I can never remember the name of the movie with Charlize Theron and Seth Rogen, where she's a speechwriter, or she's a politician. Seth Rogen's her speechwriter. Paul Scheer's got a small part in that. He's in the werewolf movie Slices. Tons of other stuff. He's in, excuse me, an episode of Parks and Recreation, and which Jason Mantzoukas, his How Did This Get Made co-host, is in a bunch of episodes of Parks and Recreation. As I said, I loved The League. I've rewatched it. I'll rewatch it again. I thought it was an absolutely hilarious show. And his character Andre is the the whipping boy of the group. But it's absolutely hilarious show, and he had another show. Let me see if it's gonna be ready. Yeah, he had this show that I've never seen that I'd like to see. Oh, he was in Black Monday. Forgot about that. Fresh off the boat. Veep. Starred in Human Giant, but he's got a show called NTSF SDSUV, which I believe is a cop show spoof based on that title. From everything I've heard, it sounds hilarious, and it's a show that I'd want to check. I need to find where it's streaming, or if I have to watch it on YouTube or something. I don't know. But anyway, I'm a fan. And, and he's written comic books. He wrote Cosmic Ghost Rider Destroys Marvel History, I think is the name of it, which is a pretty fun book. So, but what about you? Are you familiar at all with Paul Scheer? Are you a fan of Paul Scheer? Do you not like him? Uh, if you like him, what do you like about him? What have you seen him in? If you don't like him, what is it about him you don't like? He's got that little like David Letterman gap in his teeth. Maybe you don't like that, but that's superficial. Come on, people. Don't judge him based on that. Anyway, let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here at the Low Budget Review Show. Please like, share, and subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. And if you'd care to follow me on other social media, my Twitter is at Ronan5757. My Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comic books, board games, and fuzzy animals, is Eric Smith 5757. That's Eric with a K, ERIKSMITH 5757. And on Blue Sky, I am at EL Smith. That's all I've got. This has been the Low Budget Review Show. I have been Eric Smith, and until next time, read more books.